Hello and welcome to another episode of Stories of Facilitating Software Design and Architecture. Yes. It's the title that none of us can remember. I'm Andrew Harmer-Law, and I'm joined by the usual suspects who are with me. We're all three of us here today. Kenny Schwegler and Andrea Magnorski. I think this is where you wave, guys. Kenny can't wave, so he's got a cup. And today we're joined by Katie Clark. Katie, do you want to introduce yourself and then take it away?
Of course. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Katie. I'm based in Munich, and in my introduction, I usually tell some variation of the story of zigzagging between more the business, the domain side of things, and the tech side of things. And I've had multiple people try and put me in a box, or I think I've had an interview where someone drew a Venn diagram and asked me to say what I wanted to do. I think they also threw in research. And I always hated that because I think they're so closely related and they go hand in hand, or one doesn't go without the other. And so, yeah, I've been on the business side. I've been a developer. And then according to a very dear colleague of mine, I did not hide my soft skills well enough. So now I'm in leadership, but still in the software space. Multiple roles, multiple perspectives. Now I'm in a consultancy. So I also get to do lots of different things. And I experienced lots of workshops throughout my times. I already warned the other three that I brought two stories along. So the stories that I brought are not about what happens during a workshop, but they're more about the things that happen before a workshop or around a workshop, and especially when there's multiple facilitators. And the facilitators have different experience levels, different organizational knowledge, because I think that's where it gets really interesting and what's usually not covered in the general advice of you need to prepare flip charts and make sure that the chairs are in some reasonable configuration. So yeah, the first story is pretty much from when I was fresh out of university. I was something similar to a PO, so on the business side of things. And I was also part of this massive enterprise IT project as part of one of the project streams around product master data, but not relevant for the story. So this whole project was about transforming the R&D processes and the tooling that the R&D people were using. And I was in this manufacturing supply chain master data side of things. And I was getting increasingly frustrated and confused because nobody really understood the data in the existing system, which was very, very, very old and very, very enterprisey. And also people were really struggling to understand non-human interfaces and that this was actually a possibility that systems could talk to each other and you didn't need a whole department of people massaging the data and cleaning it up. So I spent way too much time with one of the enterprise architects going through these database schema wallpapers, trying to figure out what was happening. It was a wild session. It definitely did not work. And so we were kind of trying to design and decide things without fully understanding what was going on. I think we all have a TDD heart in us somewhere. I didn't know that that was a thing yet, but yeah, it was definitely popping out. And so in my frustration, I was talking to my stream lead and I was saying, can we just ask the people working on this today? What are their pain points with this current system? What are they even doing with the current system? Where can this new project add value? And so it was this, can't we just do a workshop with them? And two unexpected things happened when I brought this up. So number one, it was pre-pandemic, so we were in the office. So my stream lead took me and we walked to the next building to a handful of potential workshop participants. And she introduced me to them because I'd never really met them before. We chatted to them about what they'd heard about this overall R&D project. And it had a bit of a weird rumor. There wasn't too much change management going on yet, but people knew that something big was happening. We briefly explained the idea about the workshop. We asked them what they thought about it. We asked them if they were willing to spend the time with us. And only then did we send the invitation. So this whole consent-based participation that I kind of didn't expect at that point in time, but in retrospect, very, very cool. And the second thing that happened when I pitched this workshop idea to my stream lead was, hey, this is a good idea, but you need someone with more gray hair to help facilitate and to make sure you're taken serious. Now, I don't know what you were like in your mid-20s, but I really didn't like being told that I couldn't do something. So I had a witty comment, and unfortunately, I cannot remember if I came up with it right away or if this was like a week later in the next one-on-one. But I did have a hairdresser appointment scheduled for shortly after. And so I was asking my stream lead if I should get like silver gray hair or fully white hair, and if that would solve the problem. But anyways, I got assigned a consultant to support my workshop. In my opinion, he did not have visible gray hair, but okay. He prepared 3 PowerPoint slides. There was a welcome slide, there was a project summary slide, and there was an agenda slide. And then we walked through the process, this like R&D process with the participants. We collected their pain points. We asked them to share stories. We started documenting all of that, and we learned a lot. And the cool thing was also the other streams started organizing workshops with real users as well. So copycatting, always a really cool thing. All right, so that was story number 1. Story number 2 is many years later. I still didn't have gray hair. Important side fact here. But I was in a leadership role in my current organization, so in a consultancy. And within this, I was formally accountable for the project that this story is about. To set the scene a little bit, this project team had built a main application over multiple years. We'd noticed that there was a gap, and we decided that it really didn't belong into the existing domain. It was a subdomain / separate domain. It really deserved to be its own service. In the previous year, we'd done a small prototype for like an MVP, small separate microservice. And now we'd finally gotten the go ahead that we could actually kick this off and do it for real. And so as a team setup, we decided to break out like a mission team so that we'd have focus and speed. And about 2 months before we actually started with this mission, we sat down for a kickoff, let's get sorted kind of workshop. Or kind of we were thinking about doing this. Again, the story is about what happens before the actual workshop. So there was a lot of team buzz happening about, hey, should we maybe have a kickoff workshop? Hey, could it make sense to maybe meet on site? Because this was after the pandemic and we mostly interacted remotely. Hey, Katie, what do you think? Would this be possible? Can we travel? All of that. And I think the last important thing for setting the scene is that this is a really mature team. So there's really high trust within the team. They have a very mature way of working, and also the team and the customer interacted really, really well. So yeah, basically from the start, this wasn't my workshop, if we want to have ownership labels assigned to it. So this was very much the team's workshop, and I was encouraging the team and supporting them and making sure that we had all the travel budget we needed and all the post-its were in place and that all the important stuff around it were sorted out. But I was accountable for the project and also this MVP, and I really wanted it to go well and to be set up for success. But yeah, it was definitely not me in a formal or hierarchical decision. And I wasn't going to be the person that would overrule things within the workshop. So yeah. But in order to kind of set up for a good workshop outcome, I did a lot of the influencing beforehand. So there were a lot of coffee chats and one-on-ones and regular syncs where we started chatting about, hey, what do we want to do? What do we need to know? How to start this mission team? Like, is this a workshop which is more business focused or more tech focused? Do we want to do a deeper workshop or a more shallow one? And I was talking to different groups and subgroups and individuals, kind of, iterating over what actually made sense, collecting different ideas, throwing them together to really form a nice plan. I did ask the team for permission if I could join the workshop. I really like workshops. I was invested in it. And they said yes. But it was very clear then that I could only join the workshop 1.5 hours later. So any idea of like offering my services as facilitator to join were out the right window, because the first 1.5 hours are usually where the most interesting things, right, where you set up the most relevant things. So yeah, we also chatted about, are we going to talk more about the problem space or the solution space? What kind of agenda could make sense? What's a realistic goal to have before lunch? So lots of chatting beforehand. There was one colleague that I talked to quite a bit. He often naturally leads meetings, and he has a really, really good eye for group dynamics and facilitation in general. So we chatted about like what are the success factors for these kinds of workshops, what is worth keeping an eye on. So, for example, we spent a lot of time chatting about making the agenda explicit, asking for buy-in to the agenda from your participants at the beginning, and kind of having the room ready and prepared to kind of guide people along the way. So again, agenda in one space, the whiteboard ready to go, the pens strewn out across the room, just kind of reducing the friction where you can. So yeah, I ended up joining the workshop the 1.5 hours later. I kind of just found a corner chair. I could see the agenda on the whiteboard, which made me really happy. There was some input on there already. There was some things on a flip chart. I looked around and kind of had a good grasp of where they were going. And so for me as a late joiner, that was really helpful, but also for everyone that's somewhat forgetful, it's really good to start documenting things early on. And the team was in the middle of a discussion. I didn't want to interrupt them, but someone then started to loop me in and gave me like a 2 or 3 sentence summary. They were talking about the application landscape and the interfaces between them. And I was noticing that there was a lot of talking happening. And eventually I reached for a marker and I started scribbling on the whiteboard, and I asked them, well, are there any boxes missing? Which direction should the arrows be? Blah, blah, blah. The usual questions we ask at these architecture workshops. And we got a nice picture that we all agreed on. And then we moved to the next agenda point, which was about the life cycle and the states that our domain objects could go through. Again, there was lots of talking. There was lots of hand waving going on. And so I started sliding some stickies over to the most vocal participant and kind of nudged that participant into writing things down. The team's also incredibly good at taking coffee breaks, so I'm always happy about that. And after the coffee point, again, there was kind of a lot of talking happening. And they were really agreeing with each other on some of the points they were making. And so I started saying things like, oh my gosh, that's such a great point. It might even deserve to be on a sticky note with the full sarcastic spectrum. And this kind of turned into the inside joke for the rest of the afternoon. Be like, oh, yes, maybe this does deserve a post-it. Okay, maybe we do put it on a sticky note. And so kind of the dynamic moved really nicely. We had the action items at the end. We had a flashlight on the workshop at the end. And so from the feedback that the participants shared, this was like one of their highlight workshops that they'd ever attended. It covered way more than they expected, and it gave way more clarity than they originally thought. And one participant was saying, oh, we actually have a common picture, not just loads of words we will forget over the Christmas break until we actually start implementing it. So yeah, I personally always find these things that happen before a workshop or around a workshop or that aren't on the main agenda really interesting. They sometimes feel a little bit like magic tricks, even though they definitely aren't. And yeah, I'm really curious what you think and where you see the commonalities between the two stories as well.
Yeah, thanks. I have so many questions, of course, but I think my first one is 20-year-old Katie was like, I need this other person, gray haired in the meeting. Got a bit, should I get my hair done kind of mode. But now, all these years later, do you agree, disagree, or how would you do it different? And especially because you mentioned there's other workshops were being organized, right? Did they have the same thing or not? What's your take on it?
I understand it. I don't like it, but I think it's more of a problem of the organization. It had some ageism happening, but in both directions. That was the interesting bit. And I think it is something that is real. And so I told the story with the gray hair, and that was the thing that we were kind of focusing on. But it was also more about I had not been working at that organization for the past 15 years, and I was not a 20-year domain expert because 20 years ago, I was in kindergarten. I didn't know that master data was a thing. And so it was, I think, about this formal standing, this being enough, relevant enough, experienced enough to be taken seriously in a workshop concept. oftentimes you can solve this through having a sponsor, and for someone who does the invitations or kind of hands you over the ball, maybe they do the introduction. But I do understand. And also, this was the first ever workshop that I did within this organization and that my stream lead knew about. So it's also this like, I have no idea what a new and not so experienced person is going to be like in workshops. And giving them backup, I think, is a very smart and healthy thing to do. Or maybe even like a primary lead / backup, whatever the dynamics is.
To give it yourself now, if there's someone in their 20s now, would you do the same tip?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So maybe this podcast episode turns out about the like, how do you train up people? Like, how do you make it safe for new people to join in with facilitation? And I really like tandems for that. And I think, so I'm currently often asking for facilitation support, even if I don't really absolutely need it. But it's way more fun if you do it with a second person. It's way easier if you do it with a second person. And the other person gets to learn and experience a lot, especially all the thinking out loud with how to prepare stuff. And so there's like, oh, I would really like to have the tables in a different direction, or hey, let's start putting the agenda here already. And so when they are more and more in the driver's seat, they will know all these things and have absorbed them already.
Yeah, there's so many differences there. You want something neutral, right? This is what you were talking about around the area. You want something neutral. Maybe you want a representative of the group, which you needed in this case, right? Maybe you want, if there's a real conflict going on, you want everyone to feel represented in a way, because then it's easier for them to speak. I totally agree with duo things. Everyone who knows me I'm mostly always on stage with Evelyn, and most of my facilitation was with Evelyn as well, it's fun because you also have something to relate to after the workshop and can talk it over. Shared experience are really nice.
But I find facilitating with someone you know really well and you've facilitated before, or the other person is at a similar facilitation level, for me, it's a whole nother experience than someone who's quite new in it. Do you still get that sometimes, Kenny?
Yeah. I agree. I like them both, though.
Me too.
Because for me, it's like pair programming, but then for facilitation.
True.
Yeah.
It's funny. I kind of wondered about this. Like I haven't done a lot of facilitation in basically in kind of places of low risk, like low stakes. Yeah, lots of facilitation with like anyone that wants to do it really. But in high stakes scenarios, or like in places where something needs to be delivered, I kind of professionally can't afford that. And so unless it's like, for example, I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's a good idea to bring someone in from one of my clients, but then that can create a problem because it's like, well, okay, why this person? And what are they doing? It's like, oh, so are they going to have to invest more time with you? And it's like, yes, because that's how things work. So I wonder if you have dealt with that situation where you're thinking, oh, okay, basically it's you don't work inside an organization, because in that case it's easier. You're just doing something and this is just how you get stuff done. But when you're external, the rules of engagement can make this thing that would be really good if we were all part of the same team quite a lot trickier, just because of contracts and
dynamics, power
favoritism.
dynamics.
Yeah, exactly. It's only like there is all these extra layers of things where it could be that your sponsor, if your sponsor is your co-facilitator and they have like a simpler role, but they kind of sandwich and begin and end the workshop, etc. That can work really well. But it's like they're not responsible for the facilitation. It's more like we make sure that everyone is comfortable, and then the kind of hard facilitation bits are all kind of like on you. But other than that, I find the next step, I'm not sure how to do it. Have you had to do something like that, or have you experienced that?
Yeah, so the consulting dynamic is always really interesting. So in my first story, I got a consultant on purpose because it was this neutral person with some kind of authority and like deep roots into the project. And it was the consultant was definitely not the person to argue with, does this project even make sense? should we rebuild this tool? And that was really, really nice to have that as like the guardrails for the session. For high stakes scenarios, I also want to have quite a lot of control. I also want to be sure that I can make lots and lots and lots of changes really quickly. And the more facilitators you have and the more you're trying to train someone up, the harder / impossible that gets. What we did recently in a workshop, what I really, really liked is we delegated specific parts of facilitation. So it was me and someone from my consultancy co-facilitating. It was a very sticky, could go terribly wrong kind of situation, but we really, really wanted it to go well. And so we created these roles that we passed out at the beginning of the workshop. We had a CEO, a CTO, and a CDO. And we had a nice flip chart explaining it. So the CEO is the Chief Elmo Officer for the Enough, Let's Move On. So we had not just us, but also someone in the room responsible to stay on topic. We had a CTO, which was a Chief Timebox Officer. So someone else had the annoying phone that beeps, and someone else started waving that around a minute before the time box ended. And then we had a CDO, which was the Chief Documentation Officer. So we could outsource someone else making sure that we took the pictures before we took anything down or before it got moved around. And that to me was really, really helpful in this high stakes scenario, because it meant I had a few extra brain cells that I didn't really have to worry about, that I could focus on the participants and on being in the moment or on preparing whatever happens after the coffee break. And fun acronyms are always good.
I've got another, I want to kind of go back a bit, because I used to work with someone, because there's a lot that you pointed out in the kind of pre-work, like both of your stories about the work you did before it. But I used to work with someone who talked about rolling the pitch. So there was all of the I was pretty good at knowing we need to plan the room, we need to figure out what we're doing in the workshop, we need to figure out the structure, we need to identify the attendees and stuff. But you also kind of talked about the person who took you around to meet everybody, and then they kind of, some kind of human social contact had been established. And I think you also mentioned there was pre-conversations, right? You weren't having the workshop, but you were allowing people to kind of figure out and feel comfortable with the workshop. And I think that's what someone I used to work with would call rolling the pitch, right? They'd make sure that they'd kind of flattened everything out nicely, or that they were aware of what the landscape was that everything was going to take place on. And it sounds like, is that kind of that sounds like it was a very explicit benefit. Is that definitely thing? It wasn't just, you didn't just get the agenda sorted out and the attendees, right?
Exactly. So I think, especially for the first story, it wasn't here's a random Outlook invitation with a 3-line explanation from this strange person you've never heard of.
Which I used to send all the time. I was the person who'd send those out, and they'd be like, who is this person? This grey-haired person, actually, which was good. So I probably got away with it, but that's probably not a good thing. So.
I'm kind of thinking I need a wig or something. I mean, I have quite a few white hairs, but I think I need a whiter hair. You think maybe I can get
color. Blue tips or purple tips. In IT, I feel like that also really helps with looking. Sorry, we're getting off track.
Digress. Yeah.
So especially for the first company, and I was fresh out of university, they generally had a culture of pre-aligning things. The flip side of this, or the more direct way of pointing this out, is they were very conflict avoidant. So they spent a lot of time on coffees beforehand. And maybe it's also a German thing. Maybe it's also something that's quite typical for German engineering cultures. But yeah, I've taken some of that with me, and I do see the value of it to some degree. So yeah, we had a rough draft of our agenda. We had a rough idea of the goal of the workshop. And so we just threw that pitch around, and we saw which parts are sticking, what ideas do people have. So my zigzag, I didn't explain that in the introduction. I started with more of a business degree, and then I switched into a computer science degree. And I have random tidbits of the business degree that I sometimes throw around, and I'm really proud I learned them. So the IKEA principle is something from, I think, marketing, which means that people see more value in things that they were actively involved in. So an IKEA Billy bookcase, which maybe Andrea has behind her.
It's the IKEA effect.
Exactly.
It's a bias. Yeah, it's nice. I love it.
And you can totally use the IKEA effect for an agenda as well. And I don't care if we call it the interfaces design or if we call it the system-to-system communication slot or whatever it is. I'm very happy to use the wording that people are most comfortable with. And I'm also very happy to have discussions with, oh, you want to include this, but does this actually match the agenda goal? And then also doing this buy-in of, does this agenda sound okay for you? Has everyone understood what we're trying to achieve? That, again, really helps you move through the workshop nicely.
I thought it was trying to have the workshop before the workshop, but it's not.
No,
right?
no.
Sometimes it's kind of almost like priming people, like, you are not going to agree with the other. Here are the other people that are coming. We know that you're not going to agree with them, and we're going to make a space for that conversation.
Yeah, I've done that also. I don't love it, but it is necessary. And I think in both of my stories, it was more about sparing on the agenda and like figuring out iterations of the agenda and how we wanted to do those. And probably it was mostly aligning the expectation management so that we didn't have like some people that were like, oh yeah, if we just talk about this for 3 hours, this is a great success. And someone else wanted like a fully filled backlog with 15 ADRs fully written out. So that creates a lot of tension that you can avoid. So kind of like buzzing through that. And like I was the main actor in the story. Obviously, you invited me on this podcast, but everybody else, if you'd asked them, they also had lots of conversations about this workshop and about the MVP and about how the system could look and which parts they thought were interesting and what they were maybe worried about and so on. So there's a lot of just like buzzing happening. And so there's like this social dynamic, social engineering going on.
What I liked is that you mentioned the IKEA effect, because people often talk about biases in a bad way. And now you just mentioned a bias that you can actually use to make people more comfortable. It's nudging, right? So I really enjoyed it. And the second thing I was thinking about in both your stories, and that would be a question I had, it was about consent. You walked to, in the first story, you went to people, asked for consent. That's a very healthy, in my opinion, way. And in the second one, you already had consent because they wanted it. Have you ever had the time where, because what I hear from your story in the background, it's not about you, it's about the people, which that's the relation between both workshop, I think. And that's very healthy, right? As a facilitator, you are there for them. But did you ever had that you were asking for consent and they didn't want to? Did you ever experience that before? That you're like, to do a workshop and they're like, no?
I've had skeptics. I've had a bunch of people that are more on the, why do I have to talk to people? Can't you just give me the ticket and let me implement it? And like, we've been doing this for 20 years. Just read the manual. Like, what is the point of all of this? For the first few years, because I didn't have gray hair and because I hadn't been at the organization for 20 years, if you ask someone to explain their job to you and you kind of say, hey, I know you're the expert. I know I haven't been there this long. I would really like to understand what you're doing, how this works, blah, blah, blah. Generally, I've had good experiences with that. Sometimes it was is this really necessary? Oh, I'm so busy. Then I kind of put but we really value your time and maybe we can figure out a workshop mode where you explain the basics, then you give us the documentation or whatever it is, and then we have a second session where we can ask follow-up questions. So like working around with that works generally really well. And now with my current role, because it's always like, what kind of role do you have? Like, what's your interest? What's your stakes? What authority do you inherently carry around with? I think I've had a couple of people that were like, oh, not again, not another workshop. But that was usually, I think there was always enough peer pressure around, or they were so far in the minority that the theme was very much, but there's other people that really want to do it. You will kind of miss out if you're not part of it. Are you really sure that this is a good choice? And so then you can kind of rope them in and you get that dynamic, that FOMO dynamic that we all know and love. But no, I don't think I've ever had anyone outright refuse a workshop with me. Maybe that needs to go on my bingo card.
Interesting. Don't think I have either, actually.
No?
Yeah, maybe not. I've had very difficult workshops.
I had people leaving. They didn't want to be there anyway.
Yeah.
I had people
Yeah.
leaving. Yeah.
Yeah, people that didn't love being there, absolutely. But usually you can kind of win them over.
Well,
Yeah, I think I had a question that was on the during the second story. You mentioned something like wanted to know that we got to the goals before lunchtime, as if there was lunchtime before lunchtime goals. So I kind of thought it would be interesting for you to explain what you mean by that, because I'm sure we all have different kind of heuristics on where do we want to get before lunch and why lunch is important. So yes.
So yeah, basically, so this was a workshop that wasn't a let's do event storming or let's follow this wonderful methodology that has rules and boundaries and step by step and colors attached to it. It was more of a we have this MVP, we know some things, but actually we have no idea where do we even start workshop. And so in my kind of what could possibly go wrong with this workshop, and then also the beginning of the project, my risk assessment of we will get completely lost and sidetracked was quite high in the mix. And so together with the participants in these iterations beforehand, we decided, yeah, we would rather like to have a broad workshops than a deep dive in any one topic. Deep dives you can generally also do quite well remotely or even with a smaller group. And so because it was this broad workshop and because we kind of wanted to stay with the business topics and then sometimes look at the architecture of it or the systems landscape of it, I felt it was really important to set the workshop up so we'd progress. And so what do we do before lunch versus what do we do after lunch? It's this natural split. Same with coffee breaks, but those are softer or easier to stampede. And so I wanted to make sure that we as a group had a realistic idea of what topics we could cover and also kind of what decisions in the softest way possible we wanted to have up and ready before lunch. So in this case, it was this, what are the business problems that we're trying to solve with this new service? It was what will the interfaces look like? Like, what's the information flow when we have the new system? We purposefully excluded the migration path from the old system to the new system. We are now dealing with it like half a year later because really it's not a day one problem. And this whole, what could a life cycle look like? What kind of states are we going to see with these business objects, and how does how do the states from the new system relate to the old one? That was also a discussion that made sense to have before lunch, so that then after lunch we could look into other topics in more detail. So kind of as this natural boundary, it's kind of also like group discipline for workshops. It helps to have this, well, but what do we want to achieve? Give a 7-hour workshop and you get distracted for the first 7 hours, the last 60 minutes they're not going to save you. You're not going to get all of your results in the
I don't know you, but I find that if you have a day long or even a multi-day workshop, it's really important to, on the first day especially, give them, let's say, like converge on something so they get a sense of like, oh, we're tracking. We're it might be difficult. We're kind of winning, and now we're going to lunch, and I know what we're going to lunch, and I know what we need to do next. And I think if that doesn't happen, it can be very hard to pick up the energy after the break.
Totally.
It's the setting up for success and celebrating the wins along the way, which gets you all the momentum for the afternoon, which
100%.
I always find the first hour after lunch is hard. You need a very clear path. You need a clear topic. People are sluggish. Yeah. What were you going to say, Andrew?
Yeah, no, I'm just going to say, like, it's also, sometimes you can end on a high and think it's all going great, and then everyone goes away and has a think, and they all go and talk to each other at supper, and then it comes back on day one, and they're like, we didn't like what we did. So you've got to have at least some stuff you can point back to, and like you said, just because the weight of what's coming can weigh on people heavier than what they've done sometimes. They're like, well, it wasn't such a big deal. And you're like, well, we did this. We got here. We agreed that we agreed we disagree or something, right? You can.
Mhm. Lunch is a really good thing. It's this, okay, so these are the 3 things we discussed. Like, is anything missing? Did anything come up over lunch? Do we disagree on anything? I'm going to open it up. And if not, then it really is closed for that day. And then you don't get to question everything from the first half of the day in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, relitigating stuff.
Oh, I
So,
like that. Yeah, the
we
note
could keep-
taking in.
We can keep
Sorry,
like
sorry,
this. Sorry, I'm doing a
yes.
really bad job of like stopping this. We need to. This is too much fun. But
Yes.
yeah, so that was super interesting, Katie. There was like way more than thing to think about in there. Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. I'm
Having
sure
me.
It's going to be an amazing episode. And yeah, Kenny and Andrea, I'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.